Those of us who attempt to nurture greater mindfulness in our lives sooner or later discover that it is most difficult to be mindful at just those times when mindfulness would be most helpful. When the pressure is on, when we're feeling bad, when there doesn't seem to be a moment to spare, these are the times when being mindful can be a major challenge. They're also the times when we need it most. Mindfulness is at least as much about ordinary daily living as it is about making some quiet time for formal practice. In fact, we could say that ultimately life itself is the practice. There is no waking moment in which we might not be more alive and more in touch if we were more aware. So the real work of mindfulness actually starts with life itself. This is especially so when life is particularly difficult, when it's hard going, when the mind is all over the place. At such times, we most need the stability, the clarity, and the insight that mindfulness offers. From the outset, both the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program and the Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy Program emphasize the importance of bringing mindfulness to everyday life. They invite us to pay attention to routine activities such as brushing our teeth, feeding the cat, taking out the garbage, or to use sensations in our bodies as a way to stay aware and present in each moment, and to support mindfulness of any experience by breathing with it. The MBCT program also offers a special tool that is specifically designed to bring mindfulness into our everyday lives, particularly at those tipping points when our mood is beginning to go down. The tool is a mini meditation called the 3-minute breathing space. In MBCT, it is always used as the first step in dealing with difficult situations and feelings. In the breathing space, the entire teaching of the MBCT program is concentrated in 3 steps. Many of those who have participated in the program have singled this practice out as the most useful feature of the whole course. Why don't you dive in and take a 3-minute breathing space right now, following the instructions on track 7 of the guided practice session. At first, we practice this breathing space for 3 minutes at set times 3 times a day. But once we have the hang of it, it can be deployed anytime, anywhere, for the duration of 1 or 2 breaths to 5 to 10 minutes, as conditions permit. Soon we may find we're using it to some degree or another in many situations, such as when we notice unpleasant feelings, or a sense of tightening or holding in the body, or feelings of being overwhelmed by events. In such situations, the breathing space allows us to steady ourselves. It allows us to see clearly what is happening through direct experiential knowing. It provides a place from which we can choose mindfully what next steps are required by the situation we find ourselves in. For most of us, bringing mindfulness into the busyness of everyday life may turn out to present a big challenge. The breathing space was developed to allow a deliberate change of stance toward what is going on in any moment. In a potentially difficult situation, this shift in mode may be essential for an effective and appropriate response. The breathing space forges an explicit link between the formal practices of meditation and daily life. Becoming aware is the first move in taking a purposeful breathing space. The aim of this step is to use the power of mindfulness first to disentangle ourselves from the doing ruminative mode, second to drop into a feeling, sensing, knowing, being mode, third, to acknowledge or witness our thoughts, feelings, and body sensations as we rest in awareness of them. Perhaps because the practice is called the breathing space, the tendency is to go straight to the breath, but the first instruction does not even mention the breath. Instead, we are invited to become aware of our posture and intentionally allow it to express a sense of dignity or of taking a stand in our life. In this way, we are tuning the instrument for stepping out of automatic pilot mode and acknowledging whatever is going on right now. This stepping out of autopilot and into awareness is inextricably linked. The The second and third steps of the breathing space allow that shift in perspective to be consolidated and stabilized. We need to be cautious of a potential pitfall in the way we use the breathing space. It is easy to see it as merely a time-out, a brief moment when we can retreat and relax before advancing again into the busyness of our lives. Although it may have some short-term benefits along these lines, the time-out approach is not as helpful in the long run as the shift from doing to being mode, because it doesn't alter our feelings of being under stress and pressure. It's best to see the breathing space as an opportunity to bring awareness to whatever is going on at this moment, to notice and step out of the routine we've become caught up in, so that we might relate differently to whatever difficulty we could be facing. So what is the difference between taking a break and taking a breathing space? An analogy may help. Most of us have at some time, I guess, been caught in a severe downpour and have had to run for shelter, perhaps in a shop doorway. Sometimes we're simply glad to be out of the rain. We stand for a while hoping it'll stop. We're dry at the moment, but as the rain continues, we know that sooner or later we're going to have to face it. The thing we tried to escape is still here. So finally, in one scenario, we go back out into the rain, grumbling, even cursing our luck as the rain drenches us. At other times, another scenario might unfold for us. We may take shelter in a very different way. We stand in a doorway for a while, aware of the prospect of getting soaked and not liking it very much. We notice that we're hoping that it will stop, but seeing that it shows no sign of stopping, realize that being upset about it and worrying about how soaked we're going to get is only adding to our discomfort. So we stop clinging to the hope that it will stop raining and enter the downpour, letting ourselves be drenched and accepting that this is what is happening at this moment. Approaching the situation in this way may allow us to experience the rain itself. We may notice that there's something rather compelling about the way it's splashing off everything it hits. The rain has not stopped. We may be getting wetter and wetter, but our relationship to what is happening has changed the whole experience. The analogy of seeking shelter from a rainstorm evokes the markedly different ways in which any meditative practice can be used, either as a clever way of hiding from difficult experiences, hoping they will go away, or as a way of turning to face them, changing the way we relate to them. The breathing space is more than a time out, a time when we take shelter, gritting our teeth and hoping the storm will pass. By stepping out of automatic pilot, we allow ourselves to hold, as objects of our attention, everything in the here and now. This includes our breath and body sensations and the jumble of our feelings and thoughts. As we do this, we may find that our awareness of these feelings or thoughts brings with it a fresh and transformative perspective. Suddenly, we are inhabiting a wider view of our experience, rather than being so caught up in it all. It takes some practice for the 3-minute breathing space to serve as an effective, practical way to pause and gather ourselves in the midst of troubling situations. That's why it's useful to begin by scheduling time for a breathing space at 3 specific times during the day for at least a week. That can get us launched into using it not only at pre-programmed times, but also whenever we feel we most need it, such as when we feel under particular stress. The aim is for the breathing space to become an important vehicle for bringing the growing power of our formal meditation practice into our daily life. Although we call it the 3-minute breathing space, it's important to see that the precise form and duration of the breathing space can be tailored to the constraints of any situation in which we find ourselves, just keeping in mind that a breathing space is always available to us profoundly affects many aspects of our lives. Like all meditation practices, the breathing space requires a kind of effort, but if we are too goal-oriented about it, our very striving may only increase our difficulties. The breathing space itself can actually become a source of aversion if it is practiced in the spirit of fixing things. Our challenge and our responsibility in this simple practice is simply to give ourselves over to it as best we can, remembering that what matters is our orientation toward the present moment, what we bring to it. What we get out of it is not under our control. It is part of the adventure to observe compassionately as best we can, and see what comes of stopping and dropping in on ourselves in this way in the midst of our daily lives. That is all. In this way, when we are plagued with thoughts such as, "This is not working," or "I don't have the time," or "I'm obviously not doing it right," we begin to see that these thoughts are exactly what we need to become aware of, and exactly what we need to acknowledge. If we're motivated to undertake the challenge of waking up to our lives, we only need to remember to take the time to use the breathing space, and then to give ourselves over to it as best we can in any given moment. We now arrive at the critical point. It seems easiest to be mindful at the times when we least need it. Then when we most need it, our capacity to meet the moment with mindfulness seems often to evaporate. If we wish to sidestep this vicious circle, we need to build up new attitudes to counterbalance our old habits. Whenever we feel hassled, that is the perfect moment to take a breathing space. Even if we could only manage to do it after the fact, rather than during whatever is happening, this will help us build new ways of seeing, knowing, and responding to stressful situations. This might mean taking a breathing space after that aggravating phone call, if not during it, or while we're rehashing some difficult incident that we wish had gone differently. So even if we realize at the end of the day, "Oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock at night and I haven't actually been in touch with my body or the breath once today," there and then, right in that moment, as soon as we become aware of it, we can take a breathing space. That moment is a moment of realization, and is now the perfect moment to practice and to implement the breathing space. Without our having to worry about it or force it, the practice itself will influence, in ways both little and not so little, our relationship to how our life is unfolding. With continued practice, the habits of a lifetime of operating in the doing mode will attenuate and dissolve in the spacious, accepting embrace of mindfulness. So even if we think, "Oh, I haven't done my practice for several days," we can seize that very moment and practice. Now we may think, "Oh, there's no point. I've missed too much. I might as well pack it in, give it up." These thoughts, these very thoughts, can then serve as our cue, as a reminder to practice. Otherwise, a spiral of rumination has an opportunity to take hold right then and there as we berate ourselves for not doing what we're supposed to be doing. Ironically, that cycle of rumination might last at least 3 minutes, just time for a breathing space. Mindfulness practice is very forgiving. It beckons us to start over and over again, time after time after time, without judging us for the times we haven't managed to remember to drop in on ourselves. So we do it whenever and wherever we can, as a gesture of love and kindness towards ourselves. This orientation and an ongoing willingness to practice now, whatever happened or didn't happen in that regard in the past, will strengthen the likelihood that the next time when we really need to be fully present, the breathing space will immediately suggest itself as a skillful option. It is helpful to think of the breathing space as a door through which we can pass from the hot, murky, cramped, driven places in our minds to a lighter, cooler, more accommodating space. If we see the breathing space as always the first step in a more mindful response to unpleasant feelings of unhappiness, anger, fear, and the like, then our initial focus need only be on that one door. But once through that door, once we have entered a different space in our minds, a number of other doors lie before us leading onward. Each door offers a different option for further mindful responding, and we are invited to make a conscious choice of which door to open next. There are 4 options, and I'll go through them each in turn. The first is re-entry. Re-entry is the simplest option after we've completed the 3rd step of the breathing space. We simply leave it at that. With a new mode of mind in place, we mentally re-enter the difficult situation that prompted us to take the breathing space. We may find the negative thoughts, the unpleasant feelings, the intense physical sensations, the shouting boss, or the screaming child are all still here. But we can now approach them perhaps more matter-of-factly, responding skillfully to the needs of the moment rather than reacting automatically in ways that will simply compound the difficulties we're experiencing. Once we are in this mode of mind, its inherent wisdom may make the next step we need to take much clearer. And we can support this wiser mode by staying mindfully present as best we can, grounded in awareness of our bodily experience in each moment. Sometimes the change is very subtle. One participant said, "I woke up feeling rotten. I hadn't slept well. I was tired and thick-headed. I had a day of work ahead of me. I could feel the old, familiar feelings of desperation rising up. As I was lying there feeling miserable, some part of me remembered my breath, and I took a breathing space. After it, I lay in bed for a while, just watching my breath and tuning into the sensations in my body. It seems odd, but I felt different after that. I still felt tired, thick-headed and fed up, but it didn't seem like such a disaster." Although the shift in feeling tone may be a subtle one, it actually represents a huge and crucial change in mode of mind, and every tiny shift of this kind, no matter how subtle, can open up new possibilities for what happens next. It may mean working on your to-do list one task at a time, rather than getting overwhelmed by all the things left undone. It could mean feeling regretful about snapping at a colleague without having the feeling that you should beat yourself up about it over and over again during the rest of the day. Maybe it means just feeling down when something reminds you of a recent loss, but not descending into "I'll never get over this" doomsaying. We may find that we need to explicitly remind ourselves quite frequently that the aim of the 3-minute breathing space is not to dispose of all negative states, instantly or otherwise, but to allow us to access a mode of mind in which we can be with them more effectively, and at the very least, we can cease feeding them and compounding the suffering. So now we come to the second option of what to do after the breathing space. The second option we could call the body door. With intensely unpleasant feelings, we may find it helpful to use the strategy of working the edge. As we've explained earlier, this involves dropping into the body and seeing what sensations we find there that's being created by the situation we're finding difficult. We bring our attention directly into the body, perhaps feeling the edge of the intensity, or using the breath to carry our awareness into the intensity itself, not with the intention of trying to fix anything, but simply to open and to see clearly what's already here in our body, moment by moment, focusing on any changes or fluxing in the moment-to-moment sensations. This could mean bringing attention as far into the intensity of the experience as we can, and then maintaining it with a light touch as best we can, moment by moment. If the intensity begins to feel overwhelming, we could gently shift our attention bit by bit towards some other, more stabilizing and benign focus. For instance, we might steady ourselves and regroup by focusing on the movements of the breath until we feel ready to approach the area of greater intensity again. This working through the body gives us a different place to stand, a place to step out of the ruminative, doing mode of mind and into direct experience of what is happening moment by moment. The third option we might call the thought door. Here it is. In the first step of the breathing space, we may become aware that emotionally charged thoughts are the most salient feature of our experience. If these thoughts are still a dominant feature of our experience as we complete step 3 of the breathing space, we have the option of opening the thought door by making a deliberate decision to relate differently to our thinking. We could do this in a number of ways. We could write down the thoughts on a bit of paper, or we could simply watch the thoughts come and go, viewing our thoughts as mental events rather than facts. We could relate to thoughts in the same way that we relate to sounds. We could identify a particular thought pattern as one of our recurring old mental grooves. Or we could gently ask ourselves some questions about our thinking, such as, am I overtired? Am I jumping to conclusions? Am I thinking in black and white terms? Am I expecting perfection? The key idea is that based on our previous experience of meditation practice, we probably will have already discovered some effective ways to relate differently and more creatively to negative thoughts when they arise. In the breathing space, we can now make use of those various approaches to remind ourselves that we are not our thoughts, and that thoughts are not facts, even the ones that say they are. This reminder alone can have profound effects that accumulate over time. The fourth option, after we've taken a breathing space, could be called the door of skillful action. We have emphasized the importance of bringing an accepting awareness to difficult and unpleasant experiences, but this new orientation does not mean we have to be passive. Often, the most appropriate response to unpleasant feelings, once we have acknowledged them, will be to take some considered action, to act on the basis of conscious choice. The motivation underlying our actions at these times will determine whether they turn out to be helpful or unhelpful. As we saw in the mouse in the maze experiment, the same action can have very different consequences depending on whether our motivation is based on avoidance or on openness to experience. If we are driven to get rid of unpleasant feelings, our actions will most likely backfire, digging us deeper into unhappiness. On the other hand, if we are motivated by genuine desire to take better care of ourselves, our actions can be a really skillful way to bring greater ease and relief. It might be important for us to realize that low mood particularly affects two sorts of activity. First, it makes the things we used to find pleasurable less enjoyable, causing us to lose interest in them or to give them up altogether. Second, it makes it difficult to stay on top of the daily tasks of living that may not give us pleasure, they may have never given us pleasure, but they do give us a sense of being responsible people exercising control in our own lives. In many ways, subtle and not so subtle, depression and low mood undermine us by robbing us of the energy to do the things that would nourish us the most. Simply engaging or re-engaging in such activity can have unsuspected power. So, the fourth possibility following a breathing space is to intentionally choose to do something that would once have given us either pleasure or some sense of mastery or satisfaction. Things that might have given us pleasure in the past are things such as having a hot bath, going for a walk with a dog, visiting a friend, listening to music that makes us feel good. Things that might have given us a sense of mastery or satisfaction in the past might be things like clearing out a cupboard or a drawer, doing something that we've been putting off, such as paying a bill, writing a letter to a family member or a friend, clearing off your desktop. These are things that give us a sense of mastery or satisfaction or achievement or control, and even a tiny amount of one such activity can give us a sense that we have an effect in the world. And even a small effect can counteract the sense of helplessness and lack of control that often accompanies low mood. In the case of very anxious, fearful moods, it may be particularly helpful to take action by facing and taking on situations that we have hitherto avoided. It's also both helpful and realistic to break tasks down into smaller steps and tackle only one step at a time. In all cases, it's very helpful to remember to congratulate ourselves for completing a task or even a tiny part of a task. In exploring the most effective way to take action in responding mindfully to a depressed mood, it may be helpful to keep two things in mind. First, low mood undermines and reverses the motivation process itself. Normally, we can wait until we want to do something and then just do it. However, when we feel low, we actually have to mobilize ourselves to do something before we want to do it. Second, the tiredness and fatigue that occur in depression can be very misleading. When we are not depressed, tiredness means that we need to rest. In this case, rest refreshes us. The fatigue of depression, however, is often not normal tiredness. It may not call for rest, but for increased activity, if only for a short while. Rest can worsen the fatigue. Part of taking care of ourselves in such moments is to stay in the flow of life, to keep participating in normal activities, even if our mood and thoughts seem to say there's no point. The most challenging times are often when depression comes out of the blue, such as on waking up. Here too, our initial response can be to start by taking a breathing space. It's also important to ask some specific questions. How can I best be kind to myself right now? What is the best gift I can give to myself in this moment? I don't know how long this mood will last, so how can I best look after myself until it passes? What would I do at this moment for someone I cared about who was feeling this way? How can I look after myself in the same way? Of course, even with the best of intentions, sometimes we won't be able to catch ourselves. It may feel that we've gone over the edge into a more persistent and intense negative mood state. At such times, it's important that, however weakly or fleetingly, we remember that the practice of mindfulness is still a healthy way to take care of ourselves. It is still better to bring whatever degree of mindfulness we can to this moment and take some appropriate action to care for ourselves than to sink further into a state of ruminative brooding. What we're saying here is the task when things are tough is really to focus on each moment, to handle each moment as best we can. If our approach to how we relate to a difficult moment shifts even by 1%, that is potentially an enormous shift to have made, because it affects the next moment, and the next moment, and so on. So one seemingly small change can bring about a fundamental shift in the way we live our lives. Lives.